You are now on air.
Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of the Talktagon. My name is Tao Keith, and for the first time, we are joined by the entire team. As always, Craig Allen, my esteemed co-host from a lot of things, but also from the Fight Night Picks podcast, where he hosts his own show. But for the first time ever, we also have Kristen King with us from Fansided MMA, and we got a lot to talk about. There is so much going on, and it seems to even be overshadowing the double build Bellator cards. Before we get into anything, just want to remind everybody, this show is brought to you by GetDialogue.am. If you want to start a show, just go sign in with your Twitter handle to GetDialogue.am. Click Start a Dialogue, and we can talk about anything you want. And again, that's GetDialogue.am. So, first and foremost, I noticed everywhere I turn my TV, it is Khabib. There's Khabib on TMZ. There's Khabib Nurmagomedov on Highly Questionable, on High Noon. Every ESPN regular sports show is covering the story about him threatening to quit. Kristen, I'm really curious. What do you think about this? Do you think Dana White's going to bend? And what are your just thoughts on the entire issue?
When I first saw the post this morning, I was a little shocked by it, I guess, but not really, because I know that Khabib is loyal, but it is to a fault, and I understand where he's coming from in terms of punishment for his teammate, because obviously he brings up the event that happened with Conor and UFC 223, and his teammate wasn't necessarily cut. He was punished by having his fight taken away from him at that event, but no further repercussions were taken or acted on. So I understand his point on that. But I'm a little confused, because I don't know if petulance is the best way to go about this whole thing. You know, you would think that at the end of it, you beat the top star. That should be enough for you. But I see where he's coming from, but I also don't think that this is the right hill to die on for your teammate. I don't know if Dana will necessarily bend. I know that Khabib definitely has a lot of leverage now. I don't think that there's any question about that. But I don't think that his teammate should be cut, considering how much other stuff other people have gotten away with because of who they're connected to. So I was a little bit weirded out by it in the beginning, but I understand both arguments on both sides. You know, I just think the whole thing's a little bit weird, and I think maybe Khabib is going about it the wrong way.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people who share that sentiment. Craig, do you think that fans are going to side with Khabib, or they're going to say no, this is too far?
It's clearly a divisive topic. I mean, we've seen sentiments from both sides so far today on Instagram, on Twitter. I reposted it on Twitter. It kind of, like I said, everybody on both sides. I mean, you're going to have Khabib fans, you're going to have pro UFC fans, even Conor McGregor fans. So it can go a lot of different ways. And I saw some different people out there throwing out alternatives. Maybe Khabib goes back to M1. Maybe he fights for his own promotion. Maybe, there's all sorts of different things. I think in the end, we'll see this resolved. We'll see Khabib back in the UFC. Now, you and I had talked about it earlier on today. Maybe they strip Khabib of the belt. Some people have said possibly a tournament for the lightweight belt, which I think is a great idea, but it'll never happen. So we'll have to just wait and see what happens. But you go on there right now, you go on Instagram, 1.7 million likes, 85,000 comments on Khabib's post in English, and 2.3 million likes on his Russian post. So it's certainly gaining traction. Like you said, it's on TMZ. It's all over the internet. It's a huge divisive topic, and we'll just have to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, it's one of those things where this just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And I'm sure, even myself, I thought we'd kind of at least seen the end of it for a while after the brawl broke out. But it seems like it's getting further and further away from the point. And the point is, let's find out who the best lightweight is. Right now, it's Khabib Nurmagomedov. But Tony Ferguson seems to have, earned the opportunity to, have his crack at the crown as well. Kristen, do you think that Tony Ferguson, the Ferguson Khabib fight will be made again after it's already been canceled 4 times and Dana White said it never will be again? And if so, is that the most important fight to make in the lightweight division?
Yeah, I think at this time it is actually. I know Dana said that he would never make the fight again, but after both men's performances on Saturday night, how could you not take that risk and make the fight again? I mean, this is something that we've been dying to see for like years, and obviously some circumstances have held that fight from happening, but now's the time to do it. Tony Ferguson looks great. Khabib looks great. If you don't make this fight, it's a huge disservice to the entire division because this is two of the best going up against each other. And it's exactly the same way as it was with when Khabib fought Conor. These were two of the best lightweights in the world, and we wanted to see what happens. Now that Conor is not entirely out of the picture, but he's pushed aside for a little bit, that makes way for Tony Ferguson. And after a win like that, I mean, it's kind of hard to deny him the title shot because he's definitely deserved it. At one point, he was the interim lightweight champion, and obviously, because of certain circumstances, he was stripped. And I understand why they did it, but now's the time to make that fight happen so he can be the true champion at 155 if he can get past Khabib.
And it might line up, time wise, it might line up all right because Tony Ferguson took some damage in that Pettis fight. And if Khabib's going to be suspended, right? Yeah. I mean, that suspension and the amount of time that Ferguson's going to be on the shelf could line up and mean that we could maybe see this at International Fight Week next year, maybe, or, maybe a little sooner. I mean, it would be the crown jewel of International Fight Week if they did that next July.
It would be, but the thing is, I'm a little bit worried with making that fight for such a big week because we've seen it happen before when the fight has deteriorated right before us and we had no like solid backup plan. So I see why it would be great for International Fight Week, but am I pushing for it to be the headliner? Absolutely not. I'd love to see it anytime before then or maybe afterwards, but International Fight Week is an absolute no in my book considering these guys' track records.
Yeah, and you got to imagine, they make that fight, Dana White will not sleep that entire week.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that'll be it. Do you think, hey, Craig, do you think that Dana White would actually bend and do that?
Yeah, I mean, it makes the most sense. Like Kristen said, if you have a look at the UFC's lightweight rankings right now, you have Khabib as champ, Tony Ferguson moving up to number 1, Conor to number 2, which is baffling considering, he missed 2 full years before coming back for this fight. Then you have Poirier, who was supposed to fight Nate Diaz, that fight not happening. And then below that, Alvarez, is he still with the UFC? Who knows? Barboza, Gaethje. So, and Kevin Lee as well has a fight with Ali Quintas. So to me, it makes the most sense for Tony Ferguson to take the fight. You've heard me on my show, your show, everybody's show, talking about Tony Ferguson, how great I think he is. I really do think he's the most complete lightweight and one of the most complete mixed martial artists out there in the world right now. And if he doesn't deserve the shot, I think Dustin Poirier does. But considering his injury, I'm sure he's going to be fighting sooner than, maybe International Fight Week, maybe sometime early next year. We'll see what happens. But I think Tony Ferguson definitely deserves the shot, considering he was interim champ at one point and was clearly stripped, which I don't totally agree with, nor do I agree with what happened to Colby Covington, whatever you think of him. But it says still on the UFC's website that he's interim champ, but we'll see what happens there as well.
Yeah, there's so many different ways this all could play out. I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised if Khabib's next fight was against Tyron Woodley. After the wrestling performance he put on Conor McGregor.
George St. Pierre, yeah.
Yeah, and let's just remind everybody that the UFC.com rankings are not done by the UFC. They're done by a group of writers who vote on it, and they compile the rankings after big events and things like that. So it's not like this is what the UFC is going by. And I constantly, and I was misled by that for before I got into the media game as well. You look at it and you think, oh, these are the UFC's rankings, and they're not. And the UFC's probably has a whole different set of rankings that value each fighter a completely different formula based on pay-per-view draws, salary, all types of stuff. So, I don't know if these rankings are even worth looking at when it comes to naming who's going to get the next shot. It is clear, though, that Tony Ferguson has earned that opportunity. It's just too bad with that history that might hold him up. Just quickly before we move on, I'm curious because this is one thing that it seems to be nobody's really sure on yet. If Conor McGregor does receive some sort of penalty for his actions at UFC 229 specifically, Kristen, I'll start with you. What do you think that penalty should be?
I'm just gonna go with a standard fine and suspension. I know that we saw the news that was.
But how long?
That's a great question.
10 days. Pick 10 days.
I mean, yeah, you can go with 10 days. You can go for a couple of weeks. I don't think like something as big as maybe 3 to 6 months is necessary. Anything lower than that would be fine with me. But obviously, a fine is going to have to be taken from him because of how physical he got in the octagon with Khabib's cornerman. But that should be it, realistically. I think after the whole thing that we saw and all the different angles and who hit who first, I'm so beyond that, and I don't care. If you're going to hold someone accountable, just hold them to something that's reasonable. Let's not get crazy with like suspensions that last longer than whatever punishment fits the crime, because that's stupid. For this one, maybe a few months and a sizable portion of his purse, but not too big where it's like, okay, well, that was kind of stupid and we shouldn't have taken it that far. Same goes for Khabib and I guess whoever else was involved in it. You know, obviously we knew something like this may have happened, and now that it did, now's the time to show like, hey, we don't take this stuff too kindly, but let's not bang the gavel down so hard that it comes off as ludicrous. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it also, it's kind of, if Conor McGregor has received a medical suspension to any degree, I'm not sure if he has, or
he did.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of pointless for them to overlap the two suspensions, right? The medical suspension and his punishment. But at the same time, man, would it ever be ironic for him to get nailed for this after he got away internally from the UFC anyways for throwing that dolly through the window? He received criminal charges, but the UFC didn't do anything to him. And,
Right.
and remember what Dana White was saying on that day was it was like carbon copy what he was saying on Saturday night about the worst day in UFC history and da-da-da. And then everybody wakes up Monday morning and it's not that bad. Craig, same question.
So Bellator did the same thing. Bellator, at Bellator 187, when Conor hopped in, you know, Charlie Ward was fighting. He definitely interrupted the fight for sure. It wasn't totally over. Mark Goddard hadn't totally called a stoppage just yet, and Bellator was all over him. Scott Coker, Mike Mazzulli, the Mohican Tribe Commission, they were all over it. They wanted to suspend Conor. They wanted to fine Conor. And in the end, they did nothing. And then today, Scott Coker at the Bellator 207 press conference came out and said, the actions of Conor McGregor were disgusting and this, that, and the other. But Bellator didn't do anything about it either. So it's pure hypocrisy there by Coker. Now, as far as what happened, I agree with Kristen. I think, you know, a suspension should occur. I disagree with you to an extent. You know, types of suspensions like that, they typically do overlap. So it makes a little bit of sense there. And the reason why I joke and say 10 days was because before we went on air, Ariel Helwani was on SportsCenter and said that Conor and Khabib will be temporarily suspended for 10 days. And then they're going to have a hearing on October 24th to determine whether or not they'll be suspended further. Now, I think, yeah, it's going to be some sort of concurrent type suspension with the medical suspension. And I think you'll see these two fighters back within 6 months' time.
Yeah, a temporary 10-day suspension is so pointless. It's not like they're going to fight between now and then. I mean,
exactly.
Think of all the paperwork involved in that.
Yeah.
Whatever. All right, I'm done with this. I'm so sick of this already. All right.
I just have to point out something that Craig said about the whole Bellator thing. When I did see what Scott Coker's comments were about that, I couldn't help but laugh because it was like, well, Conor's actions were despicable, but it was enough for you to promote your event with. And then you're turning around and saying now that it's just completely wrong. It's a black eye on the sport, which I understand that person's point of view in terms of seeing everything that unfolded that night. But call a spade what a spade is. You know, you can't sit there and say one side was wrong when it didn't benefit you and then go around and say the complete opposite afterwards. You know, it's like you said, a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of pot calling the kettle black. I just think that at this point, if no one can come to the conclusion that everybody was wrong here, I have no point in continuing to reiterate that to you because maybe you're just not getting it.
Yeah, you're right. It's at this point it's beating a dead horse.
Yeah.
And the hypocrisy is it's laughable. But, that's one of the reasons the fight game is so interesting, and it's unlike so many other sports. Well, I mean, the NFL is full of hypocrisy as well. That's just a whole nother topic. All right, anyways, so moving on to something that I know a lot of people think is far more interesting, the rise of Derrick Lewis. This guy, I mean, no matter what he says, it's gold, and he can do no wrong at this point. I loved watching him before this. I know Craig and I have been a fan of his for a while. I was personally kind of somewhat touched by the fact that he was helping people in Houston back when that was going on, and that's kind of what brought him to my attention. Now he's got this win over Volkov. And in the ring, he tells Rogan when they ask about title shot, no way, not on this gas tank. He realizes cardio is a problem. And yet here we are. He's going to face Cormier. And what did he gain? Over 500,000 Instagram followers in about a day over this weekend. Definitely one of the biggest names in the sport. I'm curious, Kristen, do you think that this is sustainable for Derrick Lewis? First of all, his popularity. And what do you think his actual chances are in a fight with Cormier?
Well, his popularity is always going to be sustainable because he just says the most craziest, funniest shit that I've ever heard of in my life. I was watching the fight with Volkov, and my dad, who's not really like a big MMA fan, he was watching with me. And throughout the entire post-fight interview, he was in hysterics because he thought it was just the funniest thing. So because he continues to do stuff like that, of course he's going to remain popular. Look at how he's promoting the fight already on his Instagram and on his Twitter. He's always going to remain popular in the eyes of the fans. In terms of the fight against Cormier, I'm giving him a little bit of a chance because even though we saw him essentially take a beating for about 14 and a half minutes when he took on Volkov, there's always that chance that he has to hit that person and they go down, but with Cormier's background with the wrestling, he could very well end up on his back for the entire fight, and Cormier could either ground and pound, or I wouldn't even be surprised if he hit a submission. So I'm giving Lewis a bit of a chance here. I'm not saying that he's going to be completely out of his element, but I'm taking into account the cardio issues that he has, the back issues that he has, and how explosive Daniel Cormier can be in a fight against someone of that stature, because Cormier's always had to fight the bigger guys, but he's always proven that he can handle it and then some, and then it looks just he's dominant in almost all of it. So I think he has a chance of winning, but it's a very slim chance, but I'm not counting him out completely like a lot of people are doing.
Yeah, and Cormier's proven that he's got a chin as well. He can take shots.
Yeah.
I worry that this is going to be one of those fights where it's going to be really boring. And either if it's not ended early, I could just see Cormier laying, like as you said, just gaining top position on Lewis, and Lewis just being gassed out and possibly tapping just to look for a way out. He's made no bones about the fact that he's doing this for the money. Right. Craig, same question.
I've been in Derrick Lewis's corner since, before UFC Halifax, but I have the poster behind me with Lewis in the background. He's got a style, that swang and bang type of style. And you had mentioned it back when there was Hurricane Harvey in Houston, and him and Trey the Truth, the rapper, they were going out and helping everybody out. And that was awesome to see. So I've always been on the Derrick Lewis train. Now, his fight against Volkov was the first time I ever took the fighter opposite Derrick Lewis. Heading into the fight, like Kristen had said, the suspect cardio, the injuries, in the Travis Brown fight, and a lot of people brought that up. The first body kick, that was pretty much it for Derrick Lewis. He was hurt, and he made up excuses, and he went on his post-fight talk, and it was funny and whatnot. But realistically, he tends to get hurt in just about every single fight, and he sometimes looks for a bit of a way out. I mean, we saw it in this fight against Volkov, where was it an eye injury? Was it an eye poke? I mean, he gave his back there, and Volkov could have jumped in and finished the fight. So it typically happens in just about every Lewis fight, and we don't see it nearly to the extent of the Mark Hunt fight, but it does happen. So I don't really give him much of a chance. I mean, Kristen, you're giving him a little bit. I kind of guessed that the odds were going to be roughly minus 700, plus 500, and they came in kind of around there in favor of Cormier. I think it's going to be almost similar to the Marcin Tybura fight, where Lewis was on his back for the most part. in that fight, he was able to get the knockout late, in the third round, like it typically happens. But I think Cormier's, it's more of a tune-up fight for either Stipe or Brock Lesnar.
Yeah, and I don't think you're wrong there. It is great to see another guy emerge as a star in the heavyweight division, though. Especially someone who's so unique and calculated in what he says. And he doesn't seem, I don't know if people actually think he's calculated like that, but I do think he put some planning into the stuff that he says. But even, good for him. He's earned the platform, the opportunity. Obviously we can't not talk about Bellator's 2 events on Friday and Saturday. Kristen, do you think that Bellator is wise to do these double bookings back to back?
I guess to a certain extent it makes sense, but for me, I personally don't like the back-to-back because, once one event is over, I like to kind of analyze everything that happened with the fighters that were on that card and those fighters alone, So now that I have to shift focus to 2 cards and talk about multiple people, I can kind of see if it confuses people or if it's a little bit flustering to some people, because it is a lot to take in. I guess it's okay, but if I'm not truly a fan of it, if it works for Bellator, it works for me, but it just wouldn't be my style if I was under that promotion. I want to be able to give my time and attention to one card because I know it's going to be good regardless, but now I have to do it for both. But both have great main events, great co-main events, so sure, I guess it's okay.
I don't know. I don't know, Craig. You know how I feel about this, so
and
I'll
I
let
feel.
you take over.
I don't want to speak for you, but I will. Neither one of us are very happy with it. I don't totally get it. I even tried to relay this to the KSW UFC 229 on the same day to try and draw some type of parallel, but you called me out on it, and there aren't really any. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's great to see, I will say this, for the Primus Chandler fight. It's great that, it's a USO type event. They're going to be working with veterans on it. So that's great to see. And it's great that they're going to try and promote and push the sport in Hawaii. But as far as 207, 208 are concerned, Uncasville, Connecticut, Long Island, they're not that far away. You're going to get a lot of overlap. And like Kristen said, there's going to be a lot of people that, let's say somebody gets a great finish on the main card or the undercard on Friday night. Most people will have forgotten about it by Saturday night or even Monday. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. I'm really looking forward to both cards. I think there's a lot of upside. I was even looking at the odds here before we came on, and I couldn't believe how much of an underdog Syed Awad is compared to Benson Henderson. I'm really looking forward to that fight too. So it should be a great weekend of Bellator. But yeah, it's definitely strange that they're going to schedule events on back-to-back nights.
And I know you're going to tune in, Craig, but are you going to tune in and watch both of these cards, Kristen?
Yeah, I am actually. I really don't have anything to do on Friday and Saturday, so my attention and time can go directly to them. I'm looking forward to a lot of the fights on the card. So, and like Craig said, the Sadawad and Benson Henderson fight is one that I'm definitely keeping my eye on because Benson Henderson looked great against Roger Huerta, but if he pulls that kind of performance against Sadawad, we can definitely see Benson possibly challenging for a title eventually. I know his contract is almost up, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of performance he puts on against Awad. But Awad is no joke. He can wrestle, he can strike, and he's been knocking people out, and I think he's on like a 4-fight win streak right now, and Benson hasn't necessarily had the easiest run in Bellator. So I'm excited to see how their styles play out with one another.
Of the 2 main events, which one are you more interested in?
I don't know. They're both interesting in their own way. I guess I'm going to say Fedor versus Chael because I think Chael's hilarious and I'd watch any fight that he does.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that. I feel the same way. We're lucky to have him around still. What about you, Craig? Of the 2 main events, what do you think? What are you more interested in of the 2 main events?
You threw a curveball there. I would not take Saturday's main event. I think that, both guys are kind of over the hump. Chael Sonnen, while he's been active, he's been all right. He's definitely really relying heavily on his wrestling. We saw it in the Vanderlei Silva fight. He was able to get the win against Rampage. As far as Fedor is concerned, I think he's still all right. I mean, his wrestling's good, his striking's good. He's quite well-rounded. We saw in the Bellator countdowns on YouTube that he's been training in, where is it? The Netherlands, working on his striking, which is good to see. But yeah, I really think you're going to have a more competitive matchup with Matt Mitrione. And like you and I talked about it, Ty, earlier on, Mitrione, he's hot and cold, but Ryan Bader, he's always constant, and he's on a decent streak here. He somehow found a lot of power in those fists. So I think Ryan Bader is going to get the win, and I think he's going to become a double champ by the end of this.
Yeah, and I think that's the consensus. I think a lot of people think that this is just an inevitable. I don't know myself. I definitely will be tuning in though. Now before we go, I guess I don't want to really, but we're gonna talk about John Jones for a minute. Now, this fight with Gustafson, I'm sure I know all three of us agree that this is a long time coming. Now, Kristen, do you think that Gustafson has? I've heard rumors basically saying that John Jones says he took Gustafson too lightly, didn't train as well, blah blah blah, and that's why Gustafson did so well against him, and with full camp, completely different result. Do you think there's any truth to that, and do you think we see a different result when they meet for a second time?
I don't think the result changes much. I know it's going to be a very competitive fight between Jones and Gustafson, because while Jones was away, Gustafson has gotten better, minus the injuries and setbacks he may have suffered already. I still think it's going to be very competitive, and maybe John Jones did take him lightly in the first fight, because when that fight was made, it was almost like, I guess Alexander wasn't really well known right at that time, and his title shot was a little bit like, oh, okay, well, yeah, let's see how that one plays out. It wasn't like a fight where everyone was interested to see, like, oh my God, is this the one to be able to dethrone Jones? No one thought about that until the fight actually happened.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
Right. We started seeing that, oh my goodness, maybe Gustafson is the person to dethrone him. And many people to this day still believe that he did do enough. I personally thought that Jones started to make the proper adjustments in the later rounds, which is what gave him the fight. But this time he already knows exactly who Gustafson is. He knows exactly what his fighting style is. And Jones, even though he's been away, I feel like he still could get it done by decision, but by no means is this going to be an easy fight. I know Gustafson is very pumped up about it, and like I said, he's looked great in his recent showings. So we'll just have to see. I still believe that it's going to be the exact same result, but a competitive fight nonetheless.
Yeah, and I guess for me, the reason that it was so competitive in the first place was because stylistically, Gustafson is a bad matchup for Jones. He's got the length and the striking ability to counter Jones, and that's one of the things that Jones does best. And so I've always thought that was the reason.
Yeah, exactly. He could match Jones at his own game, and that's something no one had done before, and that's why it was so intriguing when they actually fought and the fight went the way that it did.
Do you agree with that, Craig?
It's going to be a weird one. These guys have been relatively, I don't want to say inactive, but they haven't been as active as they were heading into that first matchup. So to me, it's almost a toss-up at this point. I would slightly edge Jones. Obviously, I mean, we've seen what he did against Cormier, and you can't really discount that all that much. It's going to be interesting for sure. It's going to be tough to replicate that size and that length in the gym for Jones. So, yeah, I mean, I would definitely give it to Jones. We're this far out from UFC 232, but I think it's going to be a really good card as well. I mean, whether Cyborg and Nunez ends up on that, I think UFC's got something good up their sleeve for that card.
You know what? One last question. I gotta do it. I'm sorry. Do we see Nate Diaz in the octagon in 2018, Kristen?
God, I hope so. I love Nate Diaz so much, and I really do hope he gets back to fighting, because a personality and a fighter like that, you can't keep him away too long. And I know maybe him being away is by his own problems outside, or he just doesn't want to fight. I totally get it. But we need to see him back in the octagon, especially now that things at 155 are super hot right now. he needs to be in there. He needs to be in that mix. He's still ranked, I believe. So why not, why not compete against some of the best, which Nate could have a chance at beating, but we just won't see yet. So I hope he goes back in there. I would love to see Nate Diaz fight before 2018 is over.
Craig?
Crazy that he's still ranked, but he is. And yeah, I mean, you got to have him back, especially building off of 229. The pay-per-view numbers are insane. You've got a fan base that may possibly be returning, and you want to capitalize on that. So I understand why we're going to have Daniel Cormier taking on Derrick Lewis at 230, and you want to keep building. You have to. So 231's looking great, 232's looking great, and hopefully Nate Diaz gets added to one of these cards.
Yeah, it would definitely be great for the sport. And now that Conor McGregor has lost, and he's kind of at least temporarily out of the title picture, you kind of wonder, is this the right time for the trilogy fight? And we also know Nate Diaz is only going to take a couple of different fights, and it looks like those 2 fights will maybe be a rematch with Conor and first shot at Khabib, who he thinks he can beat. Otherwise, I don't see the UFC being able to lure him back into the octagon. But we'll see.
They did with Poirier, though. He was willing to come out and fight with Poirier.
Very true. Very true. And that surprised me, though. That really surprised me. But do you think that the UFC is going to actually be able to entice him with another matchup, though?
I think so, depending on the situation that they're in now, because you did bring up the trilogy fight with Conor. And if the UFC wants to get if the UFC wants to get Conor another possible win before taking on Khabib, he may take on Diaz only because they're all under the same impression that they have the blueprint to beat Diaz, because they did that at UFC 202. So if they want to get a win for Conor before he rematches Khabib, inevitably, it would have to be against someone like a Nate Diaz, who he knows he can beat because he's done it before. So we'll just have to see what direction they go in. I know when the Dustin Poirier fight fell through, everyone was calling for Conor, and I understood why exactly they were doing that. So we'll just have to see what kind of moves that the UFC makes and what Nate and Conor do at this point.
As always, before we wrap up, I always like to find out what everybody's doing and where we can find your stuff. And I noticed Kristen said earlier she had nothing to do on Friday and Saturday, so I'm guessing she's going to be working at the 2 Bellator events for Fansided.
Yeah.
Where can we find your stuff? And other than that, what's going to be going on? You grab news and Twitter reactions. You're an expert at that. What's been going on, and what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, so Bellator 207, 208, I'm going to be around. Probably going to do my Twitter reacts like I usually do. I may do the star making performances now that I've kind of found my way with that. You can always find my work at fansided.com/author/KKING. And if you don't want to do that, you can just go on my Twitter, which is Kristen King MMA. I post all my articles on there, as well as the articles of my esteemed colleagues such as Ty. And yeah, you can find me those 2 places.
Craig, we always know you are one of the hardest working guys in this industry and one of the most underappreciated for now. What are you up to? What's going on? What's on the horizon?
I'm the rogue, non-fan-sided member of this group. I am. You can find me, Craig Allen FNP, on Twitter and Instagram. Fight Night Picks on Twitter as well. Different articles, cool content, all different sorts of things on fightnightpicks.net, as well as previous 2-minute breakdowns from UFC 229. I'll be pumping more of those out as we get closer to UFC Moncton later on this month. So you can find different things on YouTube as well as iTunes and Stitcher. You can find the podcast, and I'm planning on doing a couple of different live events on YouTube tomorrow and Saturday night.
Always tons of stuff coming out of Fredericton. We also are going to be doing a ton of content on this platform. Different untitled, we're just going to shows just about specific topics and things like that. Both Craig and I will be doing that. And next week on Friday, the 19th, Craig?
Yeah.
Okay. Next Friday, you know what? I'll let you fill it in and just mention, the bigger get thus far, and Michael Fidel, of course, will be joining us. But please fill us in. Yeah,
I mean, you're putting an awful large load on my shoulders here, but yeah, we're looking at doing a bit of a mini series, if you will, on Friday. We're going to be talking to Jeff Houston. He's the ring announcer for Bare Knuckle FC, as well as Road FC and ACB, and I've had them on the podcast. It was earlier on this summer or spring, and we had a long conversation. But we're gonna have them on short, or for a short bit of time, and we're gonna talk about the upcoming Bare Knuckle FC 3 event coming at you next Saturday. There's plenty of talent on the card. I know. We're on the subject of Bellator. Bellator's Kennel Grove is going to be on there, among others. So really looking forward to that event, and we're going to cover it in great detail next Friday.
Yeah, and it looks like it's going to be 4 half-hour segments throughout the day, kind of like I did my special a couple weeks ago for anybody who caught that. And I know we've also got Michael from MMA Sucker coming over. He's been on the show before, and this kid is a tremendous talent. And we got a lot more people, or a few more people, hopefully a bare knuckle fighter as well, going to be coming on, and we'll be revealing all that information soon. You can find my stuff at Above the Fold Ty on Twitter. Ty O'Keefe on Facebook, same on YouTube, and please give every one of us a follow, a like, everything like that, and stay tuned for the very next episode of the Talktagon, which is always brought to you by GetDialogue.am.